David, how exactly will halving the fuel excise help motorists?
Well, it'll put more money in their pocket, which is fantastic, but it's not going to be forever. It'll only be for 3 months. But just to run our audience through how this works, so the fuel excise is a flat tax, okay? It's not progressive or regressive, it's a flat tax. That's 52 cents on the litre. So when Jim Chalmers came out moments ago and said he was halving the national fuel excise, it was literally halving that 52 cents a litre down to around 26.3 cents a litre. So if you're thinking at home now, well, what does that mean for me? Well, very simply, if you're driving a small car, you've got about 40 litres worth of fuel that you can, if you're filling right up to the top of the bar there, about 40 litres. An SUV or a sedan will give you about 60 litres worth of fuel. And that is what Jim Chalmers is saying is putting as the national benchmark of his life for how much each family or household will save. He's using that 65 litre benchmark to say that if we implement this, which will happen on Wednesday, that's when it will actually kick in, then you're going to save around $19. What does that mean? Literally, you drive into the petrol station, the servo, you fill up with an SUV or a sedan right to the brim, you're going to be walking away with $19, $20 more in your pocket. But again, it depends on the type of car you have and how much you fill up. You're looking at anywhere, if we're going to be really specific, you're looking at a saving of anywhere between sort of $16, $17 and $21 as you're leaving the servo. So, you know, that might be, I don't know, 10 meat pies. I've got no idea, but, you know, or it might be a little bit of shopping before you head home that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to have. But, you know, $20 not bad.
Before I ask you about the road user charge, Jim Chalmers made a point of saying it was temporary and it was targeted, and he was asked about the inflation and how this is going towards bringing inflation off. I think he said by 0.5% for the June quarter of next year. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. We've actually just had HSBC come out to say that under a really worst case scenario or an ugly scenario, we might be looking at Australia entering a technical recession in the middle of this year as people pull back in order to save money if it's costing you a lot more at the bowser. And other businesses are passing on the charges they get from the increase in the oil price. You have to remember a lot of things are made out of oil. So if businesses are passing that cost on, consumers are probably going to have to pay it originally but then pull back. But HSBC is making the point that ultimately, if you get this really strong pullback in demand in the economy because things are too expensive, then unemployment's going to rise and that's going to cause problems. So by having measures that can quite literally lower inflation, it helps in terms of cushioning the Australian economy from a much broader downturn.
Okay. I mentioned that road user charge there. It's been put to zero for the next 3 months. Can you just explain that to us?
Yeah, and look, everyone pays a road user charge, but this in particular is looking at heavy vehicles. So if you're looking at road user charges across state and territories, they do differ, but for heavy vehicles they don't, which is why National Cabinet has been able to implement a $0 policy for the next 3 months for heavy road users or heavy vehicles for road user charge. Kath, let me stress this point though, that if, you know, I imagine that lots of businesses are using heavy vehicles in order to transport logistics around the country. So if you've got for those particular road users, the charge going to zero for the next 3 months, that is a classic example of a business not having to pass on that charge to customers. Again, another example of not necessarily cutting inflation, but reducing inflation by, preventing inflation from rising by making sure that businesses don't necessarily have to pass that charge on to customers.
Okay, this is costing something, and it's the federal government that it's costing around $2.55 billion. Is that right?
Bang on, Kath. Yeah. Absolutely bang on. It's a lot of money. You have to remember the federal government is borrowing roughly $1 trillion, close to $1 trillion worth of money in order to pay for things like the NDS, for interest payments on debt, and for defence. They're the top 3 spending items in the budget. $2.55 billion, there is no fat in the budget to cut. So something else will have to pay for this. That is the bottom line. We're not in surplus. This money isn't available just to take out and implement. The government will not get $2.55 billion from road users because the fuel excise has gone, because the road user charge has gone for the next 3 months. Where they get that money from, we don't know yet.